In response to Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu's recent remarks about Syria, the Syrian people are rallying in protest. Netanyahu's call for a demilitarized zone in southern Syria, similar to Israel's position on southern Lebanon, has sparked widespread rejection. Syrians in Suwaida, Daraa, and Qnews have voiced their defiance in rejecting any foreign interference, especially the Israeli military presence. Now, while Netanyahu cites concerns over security in the Golan Heights, the Syrian population sees these actions as unjust aggression. The situation remains tense as Syria's resistance grows stronger against these external threats. I'm Henny Saif, and this is Think Tank.
Our world is becoming unhinged.
Al-Ahram Online has reported that Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu declared that Israel will prevent Syrian forces from entering areas south of Damascus, reaffirming Israel's indefinite occupation of parts of southern Syria. His statements have sparked renewed concerns about Israel's ongoing military actions in the region, with critics viewing them as a continuation of aggressive policies that undermine Syrian sovereignty. Netanyahu demanded the demilitarization of southern Syria, particularly in Qnews, Daraa, and Suwaida, citing security concerns and the protection of some minorities in southern Syria. Israel's defense minister, Katz, confirmed the occupation of the UN buffer zone and other key areas, emphasizing Israel's continued military presence and claimed alliances with its populations. On the other hand, Syrians protest over Netanyahu's call for a demilitarized south. The Voice of America has reported that Syria's interim president described the ongoing national dialogue as a historic opportunity for the country's reconstruction following decades of the previous regime rule. Hundreds of Syrians gathered in Damascus for the summit, where they discussed critical issues like transitional justice, the constitution, and economic reforms. The summit, organized by Syria's new rulers, aims to unify armed groups and lay the foundation for a new governance structure. The recommendations will guide a transitional government set to take power on March 1st. Tensions rise as Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu demands the demilitarization of southern Syria, prompting strong opposition from Syria and its citizens. This move heightens concerns over Israel's expanding aggression in Syria.
Recently, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's aggressive statements regarding the demilitarization of southern Syria have sparked widespread rejection from both Syrian government and its citizens. Netanyahu's claim that Israel will not tolerate the presence of Syrian forces near the Golan Heights or the influence of Hayat Tahrir al-Sham echoes Israel's long-standing policy of maintaining military pressure in Syria. His rhetoric has raised alarms, drawing comparisons between Israel's military presence in southern Syria and its ongoing operations in southern Lebanon. Israel's involvement in southern Syria raises critical questions about its true intentions in both Syria and Lebanon. Netanyahu's insistence on ensuring the security of Israel's northern borders is widely perceived as an extension of expansionist policies aimed at consolidating Israeli power and reinforcing its control over Syrian and Lebanese territories. Syria has firmly rejected Netanyahu's accusations and his call for a buffer zone, asserting its sovereignty and its right to defend its territory. Syrian officials have vowed to resist any foreign intervention, emphasizing Syria's unwavering opposition to Israeli attempts to reshape its borders. Notably, calls for demonstrations in Soeda and other southern provinces are gaining traction, reflecting widespread domestic opposition to Israeli interference. As for the potential response of Ahmad al-Shara, it is expected that he will remain steadfast in opposing Israeli provocations. With a growing sentiment of resistance, Syria is unlikely to concede to Netanyahu's demands as the country continues to strengthen its alliances to confront Israeli aggression.
Let's get into the rising tensions in southern Syria following Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu's controversial statements on the demilitarization of the region. Joined from Cairo by Dr. Mohammed Osman, the international relations specialist, and from Paris, Dr. Majid Boudin, the international law professor. Gentlemen, welcome to Think Tank. Dr. Osman, how do you assess Netanyahu's latest statements and remarks on the demilitarization of southern Syria, and what impact could they have on the Syrian stability?
Thank you, Hani, for having me. It seems that Israel's Netanyahu is bent on pursuing his expansionist agenda within the vicinity of his northern border, whether in Lebanon or in Syria. Since the fall of the Assad regime in Syria, Israel basically invaded the buffer zone that separated the occupied Golan Heights from Syria proper, occupied all of it, even went beyond occupying the strategic Jabal al-Sheikh, and also even marching into the southern countryside of Damascus, and even reaching now, as of yesterday, they have reached the countryside of Daraa. So, of course, this Israeli expansionism was compounded by Israel placing forward a vision for its presence in Syria. It said that this will be more or less basically a permanent presence, or as they, in their own words, a very long-term presence. And they said that the new Syrian government is not allowed to maintain any armed elements in southern Syria, basically establishing a de facto demilitarized zone in the south, or so calling for it. And today, even Gideon Sa'ar, the Israeli foreign minister, described the new regime in Syria as a regime presided over by a terrorist organization. He said that they shared some goals when Assad was toppled, however, that they have their profound differences with them. So, of course, even though the current Syrian government is not remotely interested in engaging in any conflict with the Israelis are taking advantage of the power vacuum in Syria and the state of chaos the country is in, basically, due to regime change, in order to basically launch a land grab and expand their areas of influence. And today, interestingly enough, yesterday, Israel has announced that for the first time in history, the Golan Heights will be open for Syrian laborers from the southern areas to go work there and come back. So it seems that they are trying to normalize their presence in southern Syria, and they are trying to convince the people that they will have to live with Israeli occupation. So, of course, the natural response from the Syrian people was outrage, calls for demonstrations, and actual demonstrations that happened, and it was cross-sect. Several sects participated, not only the Sunnis, but also the Druze were outraged by Israel's rhetoric. So it seems that the Syrian people will not easily accept their lands being occupied by the Israelis. However, there is nothing much they can do. However, today there was a relatively positive sign of Syrian officials taking the matter seriously, when the National Dialogue Conference today, in their concluding points of their final readout or statement, they condemned Israel's land grabs, and they demanded that Israel withdraw from the territories they occupied. However, beyond rhetoric, it doesn't seem that Ahmad al-Shara's transitional government, is really interested in picking a fight with the Israelis at this point.
Yes. Well, Dr. Boudin, given Syria's rejection of Israel's presence and Netanyahu's remarks, what role should international law play in addressing Israel's continued aggression in Syria? And if there is a role, how effective really can it be?
The fact that Israel is occupying a piece of the territories of Syria is a violation of international law. And this is not questionable. This is not arguable. This is a matter of fact and a matter of law. And there is no dispute whatsoever which can be raised about this matter. Now, this is what the law is, what international law said. But there is the reality. The reality is that there is a very huge problem, which we are facing, whether in Palestine, in Gaza, in Lebanon, or in Syria. That this matter is the representation of these countries. When we see the discussions or the negotiations between Israel and Hamas, it means that Israel is negotiating with an organization, but not with a state, not with an established, recognized state, which is Palestine or the Palestinian authorities. Whatever are the criticism against this Palestinian Authority, and there are a lot of criticism that we can make against this authority, which is not doing anything. In fact, the other point is also with Lebanon, they are negotiating with Hezbollah, and Hezbollah is not a state; it's an organization, and now we are. Israel is making moves in the Syrian territories, and it's coming after with another authority which is not recognized, in fact. And the problem with Syria is that it's represented either by a dictatorship, which has done a lot of harm to its people, or with an Islamist group which has no legitimacy. So this is the major problem. And it looks like that there is a trap that Israel is playing to not have in front of it legitimate representation of these countries. Mm-hmm. And this is a huge problem that the people in the region must address. Yes. They must have people that they represent their own countries to be able to discuss, to negotiate, or to claim their rights.
Yes.
And this is a point in international law but Israel is playing it very smart, and to have people in front that they can qualify as terrorists, etc., which put behind the scene the reality that Israel is occupying the territories of Syria. It's going at any time in the southern part of Lebanon. It's going in Gaza and in the West Bank and in West Jerusalem as it looks at it likes. And this matter shall be addressed. But the point is that the occupation by Israel of the Syrian
yes.
is
well,
not acceptable under international law.
Dr. Osman, now the Syrian popular protests against Israel's increasing violation of Syria's territorial integrity are on the rise, as you mentioned. Now, could this lead to a violent confrontation between the local Syrian population and Israeli forces in the occupied Syrian lands? Do you foresee that?
We cannot outrule that, of course, because when a foreign armed forces basically marches into a certain land where they are hated and basically reviled, and they definitely are an unwelcome, not even an unwelcome guest, like an unwelcome aggressor. Of course, we cannot outrule the possibility of violent interactions between the occupying forces and the local populace. It seems that, and some confrontations did happen at the beginning of this when it happened. Some demonstrators tried to impede the advance of the Israeli forces into southern Syria. However, of course, the Israelis, as always, the most immoral armed forces in the world, not moral, immoral, because in the Western pundits and the Israeli pundits usually call it the most moral army in the world. The immoral armed force they open fire on basically civilians, innocent civilians who would not carry any arms, and killed some of them actually. So the problem is violent confrontation will only breed Israeli repression and possibly even Israeli displacement from these areas they have occupied. They might decide to depopulate the cities of Ba'ath and Quneitra, for example, and other villages that they have controlled in the buffer zone and beyond. They might just decide that if the local populace is not cooperative and cannot be pacified, they will just remove them, either kill them or remove them, because this is what Israel is doing now in the West Bank, in Jenin and in Tulkarm, for example. This is what they did during their genocidal rampage in Gaza. This is what they did in the border areas in Lebanon. Now, some of these villages have been wiped off the face of the earth, and I don't think there is any possibility of them being rebuilt with the Israelis maintaining a presence on the 5 strategic heights near all of these in the vicinity of all of these border villages in southern Lebanon. So I can foresee something like this happening in Syria if violence breaks out. And this begs the question, will there actually be any armed resistance, since there are a plethora of armed factions inside Syria? Apparently, most of them now owe allegiance to the new government and are going to be integrated into Syria's new quote-unquote army. Are they willing to do anything about it? Are they willing to, for example, carry out an insurgency, an act of armed resistance against the Israeli occupation? I think this is highly unlikely. Mm-hmm. The current government in Syria knows that it wouldn't have been in power without Israeli help and facilitation through targeting the military infrastructure of the Assad regime for the better part of a year and 3 months.
Well, Dr. Boudin, hopefully we don't actually get to any armed confrontation. So what legal avenues could be explored by the Syrian government to resist Israel's infringement on Syria's sovereignty?
Well, first of all, the Syrian government must address the international community to be recognized, but with a reshuffle of the government to not be represented only or to not be representing only the extreme Islamist groups, but it should to be accepted by the international community and by the Syrian people first to reshuffle this government and to have all the components of the Syrian society be represented in the government. Second, and by acts to show that it's not excluding any part of the Syrian society. Then this renewed government should go to the international community to, first of all, to the International Court of Justice, claim its rights and claim a recognition of its rights by several means, either by a case or by a request of an advisory opinion from the International Court of Justice. And an advisory opinion has a binding effect on the international community, despite its name as an advisory opinion. But the fact that it's issued, it becomes binding in any interpretation. Mm-hmm. So the second is to go to the General Assembly of the United Nations and to claim a resolution that the Golan Heights and all the parts of Syria or the territories of Syria are belonging to Syria.
Yes.
The second, to go to the Security Council and claim that. So these are, and to you,
these are the avenues, yes. Well, unfortunately, that's all the time we have for this episode. Dr. Majid Boudin, the international law professor, and Dr. Mohammed Osman, the international relations specialist. Gentlemen, thank you very much for your insights. And as Syria's resistance strengthens, the future of its sovereignty remains in question. Again, the nation's growing protests challenge Israel's presence and reshape the region's delicate balance of power? Let's find out. Unfortunately, that's all for this edition of Think Tank. I'm Henny Saif. Thank you for joining us.